Hi everyone, it's Raghu, and I am back with another edition of Mindrolling. I'm actually just back from India and doing my yatra thing over there. Maybe on another podcast, I will share the trip I had, which was extraordinary, as India usually is. In this case, though, this podcast, I actually asked our wonderful curator of our libraries actually, Nathan, to put together some excerpts of podcasts that I've done before around practice. Because as I've said many times on these podcasts over these last few years, that practice is essential in terms of us being able to navigate our daily lives and create a sense of balance and more, shall we say, being present with the moment, each moment that we encounter. So I have talked to some incredible people, and I'm going to give you an idea of some of those people. Many of them you, of course, already know. And but before that, just want to talk about 1440.org, 1440 Multiversity. They are our wonderful sponsors, and they've been with us for quite some time. And I just wanted to suggest a couple of, they have these workshops on the weekend. It's near Santa Cruz, beautiful campus. And they have everything from Power Yoga Weekend with Brian Kest, who's an incredible yoga teacher. That's happening at the beginning of November. Then they have The Art of Total Rest with Uma Dinsmore Tooley, practical tools designed to deepen your connection to an unlimited supply of lucid, brilliant ideas. Sounds fabulous. And then there's one called Abandonment to Healing. Many of us have that within our karmic patterns. Abandonment is certainly a fear that, as they say here, it can be at the root of emotional distress and self-sabotage. So there's a wonderful person named Susan Anderson that will guide this particular weekend workshop. So go to 1440.org and take a look for yourselves and see if there isn't something there that meets your needs, because they have such a wide variety. And everything they do is completely in line with everything that Love Serve Remember Foundation, Be Here Now Network, and Ram Dass represent. So we're super happy to continue this wonderful relationship with 1440. Something else to just mention to you is the online course that our wonderful Rachel Fisher has designed. It's a meditation course from Ram Dass called Alchemy of the Heart. And you just go to ramdass.org and you will see a banner at the top. There's only a few more days to sign up through this weekend, the weekend that this podcast is coming out. And it's all free, and take advantage of that. Some beautiful practice that Ram Dass introduces over 4 weeks. So I wanted to mention that. Now, onward to this particular podcast, and it has some of my own teachers and close friends that I have chatted with over the years, and we've picked out some really important practices. And they're practices that include like perspective. It's not just, okay, here's a meditative practice. It's a way of seeing things in a shift. It's a way of shifting how we see things. I think that's more appropriate way of putting it. So we've got Joseph Goldstein, we've got Trudy Goodman, we've got Loch Kelly, who's a mindfulness expert. We've got Roshi Joan Halifx, we've got Jack Kornfield, we've got Sharon Salzberg. So to me, it's the who's who of mindfulness, meditation, and just plain old practical advice on how we can live a life in balance, which is one of my central themes on Mindrolling. So I'm pretty stoked about this. And I think it's a great offering. I think we have a couple of podcasts that we've chosen. Nathan has chosen various excerpts that are really keyed into helping us day to day. So very happy about it. It's essential, especially in these very difficult times that are going to get even more difficult next year, aren't they? Hopefully we'll come into a place of more caring and a more kind place and a more compassionate and loving place. I think we will. But these are things that we can do to help us get into that place. And once we do, then, as Ram Dass says over and over, we just radiate that compassionate heart. So enjoy this podcast, and certainly please do take advantage of it and take advantage of that course. You just get in there. As I say, it's free. Just sign up, and I think it will help. So between this podcast and that course, I think there's something there for everybody. So again, and this is Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com. We have a whole host of wonderful teachers and podcasters and thought leaders, and we're happy to present this and share it with you. We'll see you next week on Mindrolling. We're back to reality a little bit, getting real. So again, from Robert's book, the essence of living with reality is to continually surrender to what is. Surrenders, of course, that's like merit. That's a bad
Right.
term. You have already created your own personal universe with your karmas, and now you must live in it. Everyone who has sown the wind will eventually reap the whirlwind. That's kind of a cute line. However, most people try to ride out their karmic storms by barricading themselves inside psychological houses. No building, however weatherproof, can withstand every tornado, earthquake, flood, and conflagration. Almost everyone accordingly finds himself or herself existentially homeless one day or another. And to me, this was a great, succinctly putting what we do to ourselves in relation to not surrendering to what is, and not understanding all of the tendencies that we've developed, just even in this lifetime, never mind previous lifetimes, which is a whole other thing. So I wonder if you can't address that, maybe in the way of some of the practices that you've yourself used, and what you might suggest to students about the way that we do barricade ourselves by shying away from just being with the moment.
Well, I think it relates a lot to what we've been talking about. I see it relating in two ways. That we barricade ourselves first in the very notion of self. That there's someone, some substantial being inside who I am, and then we try to protect it or defend it or aggrandize it or satisfy it or gratify it, and it's all revolving around this notion of I, of some being, and that's the essential contraction. Instead of the zero center, we are living in the self center. And that's our whole world revolves around this self center. And it's kind of interesting, even in conventional language and understanding, even though philosophically we might have a hard time understanding selflessness, that's not an easy concept to really embody or understand deeply. But on some level, we all do intuitively know the problem of it. For example, just in the way we use language, we all know that, when someone is self-centered, it's not a desirable quality. It's, if we have a friend who's very self-centered, we might, think they might benefit from some therapy, to become a little less self-centered. But it has a much deeper meaning than just the ordinary understanding of it. It's whether there is a self at the center of our way of being in the world. And that's the deepest kind of self-centeredness. And that is a limitation and a contraction, and then we try to do everything, as I said, to protect it or defend it or satisfy it. So the freedom, as from the passage you read, is freeing ourselves first from that concept or that notion or that felt experience of a self at the center of everything, and dropping more, even if it's just for moments at a time, into the zero center, where things are just arising out of causes and conditions, the karmic unfolding. So that's the first aspect of greater freedom. And then the second is, when we're in that process, and perhaps it's all unfolding more or less selflessly for a bit, but then to see how that habit of leaning into the unfolding is coloring everything. So that's another kind of, we could say, a contraction or another kind of unease. And that's where what we were talking about earlier, even if for moments of dropping back, there's nothing to want, because whatever we want will also just be passing away. So we drop back into the selfless not wanting of everything. So it's not, as you were pointing out, it's not that it becomes this gray vacuity. It's the fullness of life. Everything is there, but it's not revolving around the self-center, and we're not caught in the wanting to become. And so we really do get taste. And I want to repeat again, this, I've mentioned it many times now. It's powerful to even have moments of this not wanting. We don't have to think of it as some far-off aspiration. It's just for a few moments can, in our practice, in our life, can we drop back not wanting? And this is something else that I found really useful in my own meditation, to, when I have those moments of not leaning in to becoming, but just back in the flow of experience, not wanting, then to actually investigate or look at what is the quality of the mind in that not wanting. What is the nature of that not wanting mind? And we can see very clearly that it's really a mind of great peace. But then it becomes experiential, not some philosophic description. We're actually experiencing the peace of not wanting and the stress of wanting. So it becomes very real. And again, it might be just for a few short moments at a time, but it can be transformative.
Totally. And this, to me, is of course why we suggest to people to take some time in their lives, take a week or two, go to IMS in Barrie, and Joseph will take care of you. Although not, he stepped back a little bit, but he has people who'll take care of you all right.
Yes, yes. So there's one other little meditative exercise. It's peripherally related, but which I found really helpful, and maybe some people listening to the podcast would like to experiment with it. What I found really interesting is just in the course of daily life. So this is not being on retreat. It's not even particularly, informal sitting. Just when I'm walking around, I will often make a point of trying to notice the quickly passing thoughts in the mind. The very light ones, the ones that are not disturbing, they're not big dramas. They're just, you're going for a walk and you might think of things you have to do or things in the past, but so quickly passing, light, on one level, not a problem. What I found was that was very interesting to really start paying attention and becoming mindful even of those quickly passing, light, non-problematic thoughts. I learned a few really interesting things. One is that many of those thoughts, even though they were not super impactful because they were quickly passing, many of them contained some notion of self, of I. What we want to do, some memories or some plans. So there was an I often embedded in the content of the thought. When we're not aware of those thoughts as being just thoughts, even though they're not particularly disturbing, in the moments that they're there and we're lost in them, we are reinforcing the sense of self. We're creating and strengthening that notion. But it often goes unnoticed because those thoughts are not particularly disturbing. So they don't necessarily call us to be mindful. And I was reminded, do you know the experience sometime when you wake up in the morning, you wake up and then maybe you drop back to sleep for a moment too, and you have a momentary dream, and then you wake up again, and then you're awake. Well, I realized that through the course of the day, with all of these quickly passing thoughts, it is exactly like falling back into that dream state for just those moments. Because in those moments, we're not aware that the thought is there. We're just in it. But it doesn't last long and it doesn't bother us too much, which is why we mostly ignore them. But what I realized by paying attention and keeping an eye out for them, to realize how many times in the course of a day, it's really quite pervasive. These light thoughts are happening countless times in a day. And each time they're arising, it's like we're dreaming ourselves into existence for those moments. We're back in a dream state. We're not aware either of the fact that we're thinking or where we actually are in that moment because we've been pulled into that thought world. Right? And so it's like being in the dream. And the dream often revolves around some notion of self. And so that became a little mantra for me. Oh, I'm just dreaming myself into existence. And it's a great reminder through the day to keep an eye out for those. And it's tremendously entertaining. I love to do it because it so reveals how much of the time we are lost in a dream, that we're not really awake. to the moment.
Yeah.
So I find it a very engaging practice.
And just referring to some of the things we've been talking about around karma, this is these kind of subtle mind states create our world here.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there was another friend, I think you quoted him. Actually, I don't know him, but I know quite well who he is, and I think you're friendly with Norman Fisher, Zen teacher?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I believe this is his quote: "Make practice your whole life. The core heart is our intention, and our understanding wisdom powers our formal meditation practice." So there's a way in which people think that. Actually, I was just watching something on Facebook, which was Krishna Das is doing a European tour right now, and it was he had some kind of Q&A, and someone says, "Well, what do I do? I've got my practice, and I'm." Doing whatever, and then I've got my family life, and I'm trying to take care. What do I do? There's two things, and Krishna said, "I didn't think they are two things," and I thought that was a great response. And a lot of people have that issue around practice is one thing, but then living our day-to-day life is another thing. And so if this came from Norman or you, whoever. But make practice your whole life, and cultivating, that heart understanding that allows you to integrate and not think that they are in any way separate. You want to just talk about cultivating practice as your life as practice.
Yeah, I actually just did a whole a 6-week video course called "Everything Is Your Path."
Oh, really?
And yeah, and I did that actually through Conscious too. You can still join it because we just started. Because this is so dear to my heart, I had to find a way to make everything my path and to integrate practice with daily life. Because as I mentioned, I became a mom really young. I wasn't off in ashrams and traveling through Asia in monasteries, practicing monastic, in that beautiful container of intensive practice. And I had to carve out times and ways, and I was even a single mom. So I would have to trade with friends, or once, sometimes friends like John and Mila Kabat-Zinn would take my daughter for a week so I could do an intensive Zen retreat for a week. And what felt like a challenge and limitation in those days, I now see as a gift. And so I say this to those of you who have busy lives and aren't going to be able to go sit a 3-month meditation course or retreat. Take heart, because in that very crucible or pressure cooker of the intensity of trying to balance work and family and all the things that we do, our relationship, our marriage, whatever it is, that in the effort to balance those things and to be mindful of where we get out of balance, because things are constantly falling out of balance, and to be able to carve out the time to do nothing. So radical. And especially these days of, constant connectivity and companies making the decision that every email must be responded to within 10 minutes. Against the backdrop of all of that, there's a bigger backdrop, which is a backdrop of perfect balance. And that we connect with in our time of being quiet each day, just feeling the harmonious activity of this body, the fact that the organs and systems are all working together to sustain our life and consciousness. Being aware of what supports our life, the air we breathe, the sounds we hear, the earth that holds us up, gravity, just to really understand the Dharma in these everyday terms and see its functioning all day long. This, I'm not sure it can be done without some periods of formal practice each day, or at least each week, because I've never tried to do that. But I think this question of, are they two things or are they not, is very profound, because meditation, prayer, kirtan, these times that we devote to our sadhana, to our spiritual practice, they are a slice of life. They're just a slice of life where we are not distracted by all the demands on us. It's a slice of life for self-care, but it's not different or separate from the rest of our life any more than, eating a meal is different and separate from getting ready for bed. It's the same consciousness throughout all of these activities, and beginning to step back into the awareness that knows that is our practice. Now, obviously, Raghu, I could go on and on. I'm very passionate about this question, so I'm glad you asked it. Thank you.
No, it's important. It's important to everybody. And the awareness of the one who knows is what gets cultivated when you sit formally on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I'm all for telling people that that's a necessity, actually. I think you're saying it's twofold. One is just, it's part of life, and it just do nothing for 5 minutes. Start there. But I think to actually practice, and I do recommend Anapana Vipassana, just focusing on the breath for a few minutes to just get a hold of this, crazy minds that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, I think, again, go see Trudy at Inside LA. You guys in LA, or come do a retreat outside of LA. And there's one thing that rang my bell was around one practice that you recommend that you do, and we should investigate here, I think, which is the Mind the Gap, which reminded me of Trungpa Rinpoche, who did a very similar thing. So, let's talk about, because this is, now we got to get into, okay, what are the antidotes to mini-me?
That's right.
There is something to do, even though I also know there's absolutely nothing to do. I've seen that with my own eyes. But there is something to do. Those things go together.
Yeah. So so one of the practices I call Mind the Gap. And actually, if you want to put this on the notes for people to look at, I have a 4-minute animated video.
Oh, cool.
That I call that is exactly this practice that's illustrated by an animator. It's called, I think, How to Find Peace of Mind in 4 minutes. So basically, it's a classical practice from Gampopa and a couple of other where you look for you start with being aware of thoughts, which is kind of like a mindfulness of thoughts, feelings, sensations. And that's your first object. And then you become interested in, all right, so now I'm aware of thoughts are coming and going. So what's not coming and going? What is between the thoughts? Let's look into the space. Let's look into the gap and be just as interested in that. And so the practice that I do that's in my book, but also I think I'd love if people would take a look at this. It's on YouTube. Finding Peace under my name, Loch Kelly. You'll see it, and that's beautifully illustrated. I start with the secular mantra, blah,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Why? Come on, Ram. Why go to blah? There is a thing with these Sanskrit words that has its own efficacy beyond our minds, Loch.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but see, what I'm doing is
Getting the religious spirits.
if you go there through the sound, you go with Ram. But if you go there through the gap, what you're doing is you're de-emphasizing thought as the method.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying, okay, you can go through sound or sacred syllable or mantra, but let's go through the door of space or the gap between chattering mind. Or rather than focusing on thoughts, feelings, sensations, you just say blah, and then you're aware of the space.
Uh-huh.
So the goal is not blah. That's just occupying your working mind. It just occupies your mind for
Right.
gives it something to chew on. You're the puppy mind. Sometimes I call it, rather than the monkey mind.
Right.
And then you'll find that the focus of awareness on spacious awareness will become what I call awareness of awareness. So Vipassana starts with one point of focus, and then 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is focusing on thoughts, feelings, sensations, and mind objects coming and going. And then effortless mindfulness, which is where the Tibetan tradition goes next, is to become aware of space or awareness itself and look back through the meditator to open up the field of intelligence that is what thoughts are made of. And that's the kind of radical thing that actually makes for this feeling of interconnectedness. Is that what I call the effortless mindfulness move, awareness of awareness. Yeah.
Right. I would love for you to just briefly say, to get to the point of having the courage to face internally and to allow yourself to be in a situation where you can encounter fear, etc., inside yourself. What's the main practice that you have done in your life to engender this courage?
Raghu, I think it's not really just one practice. It's been a combination. And one of those has been to develop attentional balance, to, really be able to bring my attention into a place of stability and to have it be very grounded and inclusive. And that is one kind of mind training. Another is the cultivation of bodhicitta, the cultivation of a loving heart, of really seeing, how much suffering there is in the world. And since I was little, I wanted to help. I wanted to end suffering. I wanted to serve. And to have that sensibility constantly arising, like, is this really going to serve here? Will this end suffering? And then the other has to do with engaging in, actions or living a life where, I'm in the charnel ground a lot. Not, I haven't sat down with the Trump voter yet. That's on my bucket list. But, it's working in really poor parts of this country and of the world, of working with dying people, of working with homeless people, of working in the prison system, of running these medical clinics in Nepal, of putting myself in the way of harm and allowing harm to really leaven my character.
I have been doing some podcasts since the beginning of this year when the new administration came into effect with many of our friends that are part of the Be Here Now network. And of course, your really close friends, Sharon and Joseph included. So this is my opportunity to just get from you in a personal way what you were going through when the reality of what has happened, the election, and then since then, some of the very, very tough news that we get on a day-to-day basis. And much of what been relating with people has been about the anxiety, of course, the chaotic nature of these day-to-day reports, the fear. People are going through a lot of very, very tough stuff. And none the least, of course, the polarization that we feel. And in this book, that you do address that. And I have some stuff that I'll prompt you about. But can you just tell me, in terms of your own personal, how did you encounter this stuff, these emotions, the reality of the situation where many, many, many people are being affected?
So, Raghu, of course I was affected, but I need to say first that I don't make any assumption about those who listening having a particular political affiliation or a particular point of view. Some may have voted for Hillary, some for Bernie, some for Trump, those Americans who are listening. Some might be outside the country. So one thing that feels very important is not to make prior assumptions about what's good or bad or where it all leads in the bigger game, and certainly not to kind of pigeonhole a group of people. So that's the first piece. As much as anything, and everyone said it, it demands a time of listening. That being said, yes, I experienced fear myself and anxiety, mostly a deep, deep concern for vulnerable people. And there is in the Buddhist teachings on why society says that a society that meets together in harmony and respects each of the members and departs in harmony can be expected to prosper and not decline, where there's a mutual respect. And a society which cares for the vulnerable among us, the women, the children, and others, can be expected to prosper and not decline. And a society in which the environment and the natural world is cared for can be expected to prosper and not decline. And I was able to talk about these things at the first White House Buddhist gathering, which was a year and a half ago or so. I doubt I'll be invited back in this administration, but you never know. And said that not only are these eternal truths, but that there are ways to train and practice these. There are ways to train ourselves in compassion and empathy, ways to train ourselves in mutual respect with mindfulness and care. There are ways to train ourselves in emotional regulation so that we can be with one another without fueling conflict. And those are the underlying principles. And so my fear that came was that we're headed in a direction that would harm the vulnerable, whether it's immigrants or the environment or people of color or those who are poor, or all those that we can name as vulnerable in the society. And of course, over these months in teaching, I've had thousands of people come and many express the anxiety. There are some things that are really important to understand. The first is that we don't want to take the anxiety of the culture and the terror and the fear that the political world is fomenting into our hearts. Part of the way politics works, not just now, but for centuries. H.L. Mencken, 100 years ago, great commentator, said that most of the work of politics is to scare the populace in all kinds of ways so that they will vote for you. But the kind of messages of fear and terror that are out there on all sides easily can kind of colonize our nervous system and take over our heart. So the first thing is not to listen to too much news, to titrate it seriously, because yes, you want to pay attention, and it's very important, but it's easy to get overrun and overwhelmed. The second is to remember what Thich Nhat Hanh said, that when the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But if even one person on the boat remained centered and calm, it was enough. It showed the way for everyone to survive. And so we can become that person on the boat in the stormy seas or with the pirates. Now, to do this internally, it can help to find a meditative safe place or a meditative resource in yourself, or a contemplative resource, to sit quietly, first take some breaths and acknowledge or bow to the anxiety or fear that's present. You can't just push it away, because that's just fear of the fear. You acknowledge it, and it's trying to protect you. You can say, thank you, I'm okay for now, thank you. This is fear, this is anxiety. And then as you breathe a little bit, having mindfully acknowledged it, find the place in your body that feels safest, connected to the earth, your buttocks in the chair, your feet on the floor. Or remember a time when you felt the most safety in your life, which might be with your grandmother when you were young, or, in the, company of somebody that you really respected and cared for, beautiful circumstance, or some safe place that you've been. And let that fill your body, and remember that there is trust in humanity and trust in safety that you can carry. That we've survived generations of struggles and wars and racism and all the things that create human suffering have been one current. But another current is human dignity and human survival, which can't be taken from you. And feel the safety and the confidence. And from that place, you can observe or witness with loving awareness, the political situation, the resonance in your body, the anxiety and so forth, but not take it so seriously. Or you can take the anxiety and the fear and inwardly make an altar and put on the altar Mother Mary or Solomon or Jesus or Kuan Yin or Buddha or whoever it is, and say, all right, you hold this for now. You hold this, the concern and fear that I have, and hold the care for the environment and all the human beings, and let me find a place of peace. And you carry this so that when those thoughts come, you can acknowledge them and say, all right, these are being held by Mother Mary, these are being held by Kuan Yin or Buddha. And it allows your body to relax and come back to a place of center. And then you can sense, I can plant seeds. And, you stretch out your arm and mend the part of the world that you can touch, or you go into the garden of life. In Zen, they say there are only two things. You sit and you sweep the garden, and it doesn't matter how big the garden is. That is, you quiet the mind and tend the heart, and then you get up and you sweep the garden of the world. So you sweep, or you plant your seeds, or you mend, whatever metaphor you like. You offer your peace, but you do it from a place of a quieter mind and a heart that has been protected and tended in some way. And there are ways to tend to ourselves and tend to the earth and the things that we care about, where we whip it up and we get into conflict with one another and we're afraid all the time, and or there are ways to stand up for what's right, to care deeply, but to do it from a place of greater presence and spacious heart, and that we become the vessel of peace in some way. When I was walking one morning with Ajahn Chah, my teacher, out on alms round, we went by a field and there was a giant boulder in the middle of the field. And he said, "Is that boulder heavy?" And we said, "Oh, yes." And he said, smiling, "Not if you don't pick it up." And there was something in the pith of that teaching that it's healthy for us to see what we should be picking up and what we should allow to be the way that it is so that we can till the field or plant or whatever, but not necessarily carry the suffering in an unhealthy way.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the practical side of dealing with disturbing, troubled emotions. And obviously, what we were talking about before in your comments around spaciousness and awareness, loving awareness, go right to the point. But maybe just a little bit more around the practicalities that people can engage with to resolve.
So there are a number of things that are important. The first is to recognize that they're there and to acknowledge, almost again with loving awareness, with a bow, oh, this is trauma, this is anger, this is pain, this is grief, this is frustration, this is overwhelm and anxiety. So first is to acknowledge them, and sometimes it's helpful even to name them in this very simple way: anxious, fearful, angry. The minute you name them, it's like you have the name of the dragon, and it starts to give you a little power over it. And then you give some space to it. And you say, oh, this is like weather. It comes, and it's powerful, but the loving awareness becomes the witness of it. However, if it's very powerful, and it's connected to some deep trauma, you can get overwhelmed or re-traumatized. So as you approach the big, difficult emotions and traumas, part of what you want to do is to first get a stable ground, a sense of, again, connection in your body with the earth, or remembering, as I said, some place of safety or some relationship with your grandmother or grandfather or a teacher or loved one or someone where you feel like this is well-being and I have this resource in me in this beautiful way. And then from the sense of well-being, you approach the really difficult emotion just a little bit, and you feel what it's like in your body. And you try to soften around it and let it have its say, let it release a little, because it's all bottled up in there, but only a little bit. And then you go back to that place of well-being so you don't drown in it, so you don't get lost in it. And there's a kind of pendulation back and forth, a little bit at a time, when it's very powerful. Or you bring in the quality of compassion, and you let yourself feel in your heart. How many people have been overwhelmed by this same emotion, by anger or fear or self-doubt or judgment or confusion? This very day, how many human beings are wrestling with this? And you begin to hold it with some tenderness and say, it's not personal. This is part of the human dance, human condition. And then with it, with that tenderness, and then going back to the place of a powerful stability, you say, all right, let me feel a little bit of it at a time. Let it tell a little of its story. Now let me digest it and quiet myself and see if I can be steady and let a little more in. So those are a few hints.
Yeah, great. First question, and this is a question that Terry, this is from Terry, and Terry, I can relate with this question quite a bit. I have always had a very reactive temper and destructive anger problem, which has at times resulted in outbursts and behavior I wish I could undo, like me wanting to yell at my dogs right now for barking. I've reached the point where I clearly see the root of this anger and desire to control is based on deeply rooted fear and insecurity. Could you address techniques for dealing with this fear? Suppression obviously doesn't work, as it just comes out in totally inappropriate ways. How can I sit with or examine this anger and underlying fear without getting sucked into it and feeding it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I think I mean, in some ways, the gap that we're looking for is between what we're feeling and how we're behaving, because we feel what we feel. And in any introspective process, we unearth a great deal of feeling, usually, and of all kinds. And so learning how to be with it more skillfully, which is the heart of this question, is the point. Not making it go away, or wishing it could never come back, or feeling like we failed. Because if we could have something like a wave of rage, come through us like the weather, and not send that email, or not lash out, or at least give it some time, then that's a hugely successful outcome. Years ago, I read an article in the New York Times about one of the early pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the classroom. Now there's so many more, but this was pretty unusual then. And this was a 4th grade classroom in Oakland. And so it's like a 9 or 10-year-old kid, right? So the journalist asked him, "What is mindfulness?" And he said, "Mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means." And I thought that is a great answer. It's a great answer. Because what does it imply? It implies knowing we're feeling angry when we start to feel angry, not after it's escalated, not after we've sent the email, not after we've lashed out, right? But as it's beginning. So we learn how to be that much in touch with our bodies, with unspoken emotion. And it also implies a certain balanced relationship with the anger, because if we fall into every feeling, if we get uncentered all the time, if we get overwhelmed all the time, we'll hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life could be very frustrating. But at the same time, this is part of the question. If we hate what we're feeling and we're afraid of it and we try to repress it, that doesn't work either. We just get tighter and tighter and tighter, and then we explode. So to be able to hang in there and say, this is anger. What does anger feel like? Actually take some interest in it is revolutionary. And that's what we practice every time we're sitting and the anger comes up, and then we lose it, but we have to begin again. And over time, you really do build that kind of confidence, that ability, not just to do it on the cushion, but to do it in life.
Yeah. And you talk about, there's one thing you talk about, I want to add here, which is you've named the add-on, and you tell that great story. I think it was with Joseph.
Josephine.
I tell, but I do find that when I get triggered into an anger, I have enough mindfulness to see it arising and see it reach out, and through practice, I have enough spaciousness around it so that I'm not acting. But I do see, the interesting part is how I see whatever triggered this anger just as a trigger. What comes up is so much of the past frustrations or anger in one's life that it's like a flash fire. So if you don't catch it right away, it is consuming. So you have to talk about the add-on, because that's what's happening in that moment.
Well, the story around Joseph was a cute story. I was teaching with my colleague, Joseph Goldstein, somewhere, and Joseph and I were sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea, and this guy came in and said to Joseph, "I just had this really terrible experience." So Joseph said, "Well, what happened?" And he said, "I felt all of this tension in my jaw, and I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am, and how I always have been and I always will be." And Joseph said, "You mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw?" And he said, "Yes, and I've never been able to get close to people. It's never going to change." And Joseph said, "You mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw?" And I was kind of watching them go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Joseph said something like, "Why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's like genuinely painful to feel all that tension in your jaw, but now you're going to be alone for the rest of your life, right?" So we look for the add-ons. That's one of the ways we define mindfulness. It's like we look for the add-ons and see if we can relinquish the add-ons and just be with our direct experience. And that gives us room to explore. Like anger is really interesting because it tends to be a very complex feeling. Like if you're not freaking out about it and you're not plotting revenge, but you're sitting there almost like saying, what is anger? What does anger feel like? You see, and you watch the anger movie, often you will see fear and you'll see sadness. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they say anger is what we pick up when we feel weak because we think it's going to make us strong. So you almost always see a kind of helplessness in there. It's like you don't know what to do. So, so the positive part of the anger is the energy, but the damaging parts are very strong. So that's another thing we do. Instead of calling it bad or wrong or terrible, as you look at your own anger, reframe that and call it a state of suffering. Like this is a painful state, and that will change things as well.
Great.